But at this point, not liking statements or calling them inappropriate in emotion and getting angry about photos leaking that they weren't careful enough, which even, again, I may agree with, and then forcing them to withdraw. To force a criminal defense attorney to withdraw, I don't know if I can beat home enough how important that is and what a high bar that must be and how unethical or illegal the conduct should be before you do that. Because a defense attorney, either appointed or choosing counsel, is there with their client once they're working. If they want to stay on, the client wants them to stay on, not much should be able to break that bond. What's up, everybody? It's early in the morning, so it's a little quieter and darker around here than usual, but so much is going on today and yesterday over the last couple of days that people have been sending me and asking for updates, and it kind of makes my head spin when there are so many cases to try to dig into and stay invested in, which is why I try to only pick a couple. But the Richard Allen Delphi stuff is so incredibly wild that I did feel like I had to comment on it. We're not going to read through all the documents and motions. It's going to be kind of a shorter and quicker update about my thoughts about what's going on because it's unusual. And we talked through it when his lawyers withdrew suddenly that nobody saw coming right before a huge hearing. The judge accepted their withdrawal without, much discussion. A lot of people said the judge was going to throw him off the case. We talked about whether or not that would even be appropriate, constitutionally speaking. And I talked about how if there was intentional wrongdoing, that would be appropriate, if she was going to report them to the bar, if they committed crimes, things like that. But doing a bad job or being negligent or things like that, it's usually between the client and the lawyer. So that's always interesting. But if the lawyer withdraws based on something the judge said, then it's out of the judge's hands. The judge is not forcing him to withdraw. There's no constitutional issues necessarily. And both of Richard Allen's lawyers withdrew. One of them orally, one of them was going to file a written motion, I think, at a later date. Well, that lawyer decided not to write a motion to withdraw and file it, but instead accused the judge of misconduct, asked for the judge's recusal and removal from the case. And he basically said, like Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Wolf of Wall Street, he's not leaving. He's staying. He's sticking around. He's going to represent Richard Allen, which I think at this point seems like it's in Richard Allen's best interest because he's definitely working for him and fighting for him. Whether or not the stuff he's arguing is going to work or is true or can be proven, I don't know. But he had some very fiery things to say about the judge. We've talked about motions to recuse in the past. It usually is the judge's decision first. And then if the judge says no to her own recusal, it can be appealed up as a potential issue or it can become an appellate issue. And at this point, he's asking her to recuse herself. And the reasons basically surround a private meeting she had with the defense attorneys prior to the last hearing. And I'll use some of the verbiage that this lawyer used, that she coerced them and forced them and ambushed them into withdrawing from representing Richard Allen. So some of the quotes and snippets from some of the documents that have been filed and some of the reporting on it is that prior to the scheduled hearing, attorneys Rozzi and Baldwin advised the court that they'll be withdrawing their representation of the defendant. The court accepts their representation. Sorry, that's the prior quote from the judge that we heard from the last hearing, that it was just immediate. They were going to withdraw. She was going to accept it. And I was like, that's interesting that there's no hearing, there's no discussion, that she wouldn't want them to stay on the case after all the work that's been done and all the document intensive things in this case. It was a little surprising. And a lot of us thought it had to do with the pictures of the crime scene that got leaked and all of the stressors and things that happened there. And that potentially there was a mole or a leak or whatever you want to call it in the defense team or friends, where somebody took something and released it that they shouldn't have. It doesn't seem like to this point anybody believes the defense attorneys themselves released those pictures, intentionally did anything wrong, wanted to create issues. It seems like at the very worst, they weren't careful enough. They didn't put things under lock and key enough. There was some negligence, is what it seems like. It's what it seems like to me. Okay, so now in the motions, they claim that the judge removed and concealed or allowed to be removed by the clerk of Carroll County defense pleadings from the chronological case summary in violation of the Indiana Supreme Court administrative rules. She accused them of gross negligence and said that if they did not withdraw, basically, I'm summarizing, if they did not withdraw from the case, she would publicly humiliate them, shame them, and disqualify them in front of all the world. Because if you remember, this was going to be the first hearing where cameras were allowed in this case. So, as a lawyer, when you're faced with that, one of the biggest cases of your life, a judge, regardless of what anybody thinks about the judge, nobody knows the judge, so everybody has respect for the judge, publicly shaming you and disqualifying you. So the lawyers asked for more time to discuss it. She basically said, no, it's now or never. Make your decision. If you withdraw, great. I'll just say you withdrew. If you didn't withdraw, it's going to be bad. There was a lot of reports of that. So that's why, where there's smoke, there's fire a lot of times. And they ended up withdrawing, so she didn't necessarily have to publicly shame them. So the motion, here's another quote from the motion. After speaking with Mr. Allen, Attorney Rozzi and Attorney Baldwin then returned to chambers, at which time Attorney Rozzi articulated to the court that the court has engaged in an ambush of defense counsel entirely void of due process, and that Attorney Rozzi would withdraw his appearance, but said withdrawal was not voluntary because the court made clear that if Attorney Rozzi did not agree to withdraw, the court would publicly shame him in front of the world and his client before forcing him off the case by disqualifying him. That's not good. That's not good. They wanted clarification. They wanted to continue talking about it. The judge wasn't interested. And one of the other complaints that they said the judge had was that these attorneys made improper statements in their Frankie's motion that we read together. Frank's motion. Sorry, I've got Frankie on the mind from 8 Passengers. But we read that motion together. It was wild. We said some of the statements and the way the lawyering is written and the way they speak. And I told you sometimes this can come back to bite you, even if there's nothing legally wrong with it. And basically, one of the things I guess the judge said to them, if you believe the lawyers, is that they made inappropriate statements, not misleading, not false statements. They didn't lie, according to the lawyers now, but instead they made inappropriate statements that the judge didn't really appreciate or didn't really like. So there's a big difference, but that's why I say the language you use can be very important. And I think you can get everything across that you want to in a professional tone without certain language. But they decided to do what they were going to do. The judge also was angry that this wasn't filed under seal, and they said they didn't have to file it under seal, which they're right. But again, you're putting yourself at odds with the judge and other people, but they felt like the world needs to know what's going on in this case. And this is all just kind of a combination. They wrote with certain language and maybe put certain things in there, knowing the world would read it and see it and react to it. And the judge didn't like any of that. Well, guess what? Parts of that I agree with the judge, but it doesn't matter if the judge likes it or not. Is it appropriate? Is it legal? Is it sound? Are they representing their client to the best of their abilities? That's really the question. And I think most of those answers are yes. The wrongdoing you can point to these attorneys mainly is the leak of those crime scene photos. But if it was negligence and somebody basically screwed them over by releasing them, I don't think that's a valid reason to force them to withdraw from this case. And now that I know it was a forced withdrawal, that's major issues. I personally believe, once again, if what's in these motions and documents are true, this judge should recuse herself. It's not the same thing as a defense attorney who's protected by the Constitution, who's already worked on the case, and we're going to hurt the defendant by removing this defense attorney. It's not the same protection when you have a judge on the case. If there is some kind of appearance of impropriety or partiality or hatred towards the defense attorneys because of the way that they're lawyering, if they're not doing anything that's actually unethical or illegal, the judge needs to recuse herself. Now, I don't know if that's true. And maybe she's going to say that's not at all how it went, and we're going to get witnesses, and we're going to have a Murdoch situation where we have two sides saying two very different things. But at this point, not liking statements or calling them inappropriate in emotion and getting angry about photos leaking that they weren't careful enough, which even, again, I may agree with, and then forcing them to withdraw. To force a criminal defense attorney to withdraw, I don't know if I can beat home enough how important that is and what a high bar that must be. and how unethical or illegal the conduct should be before you do that. Because a defense attorney, either appointed or choosing counsel, is there with their client once they're working. If they want to stay on and the client wants them to stay on, not much should be able to break that bond. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if these attorneys continue, or if this attorney continues to stay on the case, if the judge stays on the case, how you're going to be able to cut the tension with a knife in the courtroom from now on. But the wild ride does not stop with Delphi. You guys had questions. Continue to let me know in the comments if you had questions. Hit that like button if you haven't already, and subscribe to our page. We're so close to 300,000. If you hit that subscribe button, it'll go a long way to help us with that. But I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who might be interested here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at Lawyer You Know. But on Instagram, we are still at Tragos Law. So look us up on there. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. Of course, all of these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.